Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy brothers and sisters. We had a little bit of audio trouble there. I think we got it sorted out. That was Yehuda Solomon performing a Carlebach Havdalah, the three blessings of the Havdalah ceremony when we separate between Shabbos and the beginning of the new week. How are you, my holy brothers and sisters? Let's light up the darkness with a new candle. All right, who's going to be with us as we get off to a new week with some great learning? Pauline is with us from Arkansas, Sharon from Lebanon, New Jersey, Alan from Columbia, Maryland, Tommy from Missouri. If this is your first time, let us know so we can welcome you. Tom says Shavua Tov and a good vach. Good vach is Yiddish for have a good week. Harold Black and Loretta from Roseburg, Oregon. Rochelle from Modesto. Jill Sternberg says Shavua Tov from Willamette, Illinois. Bo from Athens, Texas. Paula from Chicago. Bill Aldridge is saying Shalom from Arkansas. Tonight's daf sounds very important from the title, at least to me. How to be a good neighbor. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Kurt is with us from Salt Lake City in Utah. Stephanie says Shavua Tov. Annie is with us from Michigan. Mick from Iowa. Leah says Shavua Tov from Fort Myers. And Hannah is with us from Mississippi. Chaim from Charlotte. Charles says Shavua Tov. Paul from Louisiana. Paul is tagging a friend. Beautiful. Mick says, I'm not Jewish in my blood, but in spirit. Christina says is with us from Fort Worth, Texas. Ramel Paola Lucerno Medallo is with us from the Philippines for the first time. Welcome, Ramel. It's so great to have you with us. Tommy, it's your first time. Welcome, Tommy. And okay, we're all together here. And let me see over on the YouTube side. And Rosebud Robin is with us saying Shavua Tov from Florida. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. It's great to have you with us. All right. Where are we holding? This is Daf Ayin Hey. That's page 75 in Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We've been in chapter 6 for a while, and today we finish chapter 6 by opening and completing our discussion of the 7th Mishna in chapter 6. This whole chapter was about the basic definition of a residence with respect to an eruv. In other words, if there are two or more residences in a courtyard, they have a shared courtyard, and we've had a decree ever since the time of King Solomon that if two residences share a courtyard, then they have to create an eruv to permit carrying on Shabbos. Otherwise, when they carry something in and out of their house into a courtyard that even though it's private property, it's shared with another residence, it has that character of carrying from a private domain to a public domain. That's prohibited on a biblical level, and this is close enough that the rabbis decreed that they have to create the eruv. And so they have to create this arrangement called the eruv, where they're essentially joining the two residences together into one unit so that carrying is going to be permitted on Shabbos, not only within their houses, but from the house out into the courtyard or from the courtyard back into either of the houses. And if there's many houses, the same thing. And the thing is, no matter how many houses there are in this courtyard, all of them have to join in the eruv. If any one person forgets to join the eruv, it's going to restrict everybody from carrying on Shabbos. So is there a solution? If somebody forgot to join the eruv, they meant to, they forgot, then they let the neighbors know, oi, we can't carry anything. It would be a bummer if somebody was, for example, planning to have an outdoor lunch hosting for everybody else in the courtyard. Now they can't carry utensils and vessels from the houses out to that table where they're going to eat in the courtyard if somebody forgot to join the eruv. What is an eruv? It's a basket of food that everybody contributes to, and then it's stored in one of the houses in the courtyard. If someone forgot, it would restrict everybody because there's a person who has rights to walk around in the courtyard that didn't join the eruv. But a person can renounce those rights and say, okay, I forgot to join the eruv. I renounce my rights to carry in the courtyard on Shabbos. That person won't be able to carry in and out of their house, but everybody else will. So that's definitely a neighborly thing to do. If you forgot to join the eruv and then you restrict everybody from carrying, but you can renounce your rights on Shabbos, then everyone can carry again. And what we've been studying here in chapter 6 is, well, what constitutes a residence for the purpose of an eruv? Some kind, like a house is obviously a residence, but as we saw, if there were a few people sharing what is essentially some kind of a large hall, like a catering hall, and it doesn't really have the characteristics of a residence, maybe all of the people in that building who are staying there, who are sleeping there over Shabbos, is it one residence, or if they have partitions within that hall, is it multiple residences? That's the kind of question we were examining in this chapter. Here in our final Mishna of the chapter, Mishna number 7, we're going to be discussing two courtyards. As we've seen, when courtyards are linked together, now they can join, the residents of each courtyard can make an eruv within their courtyard, and they can join the courtyards so that carrying on Shabbos is going to be permitted not only to all the residents within a courtyard, but also between the courtyards on Shabbos. So the key issue in this case, in Mishnah number 7, now this concerns a situation where we have two courtyards. We've seen this before, but one courtyard, the whole courtyard is within another courtyard. So the solid boxes are houses. So there's two houses in this courtyard. They're going to need to make an eruv with each other in order to permit carrying on Shabbos within their courtyard. The outer courtyard is a separate courtyard, and there's two houses there, and they would have to make an eruv with each other to permit carrying in the outer courtyard. Now, the issue here is that the people who live in the inner courtyard, in order for them to get out to the main road and access the rest of the city or the town, they have to pass through the outer courtyard. So that even though they don't live in the outer courtyard, their whole courtyard is within the outer courtyard. In a sense, they do live in the outer courtyard. Because they have a right to walk through it in order to get out to the road, that residents of this courtyard are going to restrict the residents of the outer courtyard if they haven't joined in an eruv. So we've talked about that a little bit before. Now we're going to get a lot more specific with this situation. All right. The Mishnah is going to tell us that in a situation where the people in the inner courtyard made an eruv, but the people in the outer courtyard did not make an eruv, well, then these people can carry inside their own courtyard on Shabbos. The people in the outer courtyard cannot carry on Shabbos. No surprise there. They didn't make an eruv. And the people in the outer courtyard do not in any way restrict the people of the inner courtyard from carrying within their courtyard. Now, the people in the inner courtyard who are allowed to carry on Shabbos can't take some item from their house and carry it into the outer courtyard. They're not going to be able to do that. And note that I said they can't carry something from their house through their courtyard to the outer courtyard. As we saw yesterday, if an object started outside, then there was a special leniency from Rabbi Shimon that objects, vessels that begin Shabbos outdoors can travel from one courtyard to another. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about they can't take an object from their house out to their courtyard and then carry here. And in fact, they can't even pick up something that's out here and carry it around the courtyard. The outer courtyard is restricted from carrying. All right. If the residents of the outer courtyard, they made an eruv with each other so that they should be permitted to carry in their courtyard. But the residents of the inner courtyard, did not make an eruv with each other. Now the equivalent of the first ruling is not true. Even though these people did not make an eruv and these people did make an eruv, so you would think, well, then these people can carry in their courtyard and these people cannot carry in their courtyard. But actually, in the situation where they didn't make an eruv with each other and they did make an eruv with each other, no one can carry in this whole greater courtyard, because these people who are prohibited to carry in their own courtyard on Shabbos, since they didn't make an eruv, and they can walk through the outer courtyard, they have a right to walk through it in order to get out to the road, that's going to restrict the members of the outer courtyard. So if there's an outer eruv but no inner eruv, nobody can carry on Shabbos. If they made an eruv in the inner courtyard and they made an eruv in the outer courtyard, they can carry in the inner courtyard and they can carry in the outer courtyard. But they can't carry objects from their houses to the other courtyard. Not from the inner courtyard to the outer courtyard, nor from the outer courtyard into the inner courtyard. Right? They can't carry between the courtyards any object that started Shabbos inside a house. They've got their own separate domains. Carrying is permitted in each of the domains, but not between the domains. And that is according to the rabbis. Rabbi Akiva disputes this ruling of the majority of the other rabbis. Rabbi Akiva says that if they made an eruv in the inner one and they made an eruv for themselves in the outer one, the people in the inner courtyard can carry within the inner courtyard, but the people in the outer courtyard are still restricted. They cannot carry in the outer courtyard because the people from the inner courtyard who have a right to carry only in their own courtyard also have a right to walk through the outer courtyard, and that is going to restrict the people of the outer courtyard, as if the situation was that when they didn't have an eruv and they did, and they restrict the outer courtyard. Rabbi Akiva says they restrict the outer courtyard even if they do have an eruv in the inner courtyard because of this right to walk through. That's according to Rabbi Akiva. That's the minority opinion. If the inner courtyard made an eruv, the outer courtyard made an eruv, but one of these houses, let's say there were more houses, 3 or 4 houses, and one of the residents of the outer courtyard forgot to join the outer eruv, well, so then it's like they don't have an eruv. They're restricted from carrying in the outer eruv. But the fact that somebody forgot to join, hold on a second. Right? So the fact that somebody forgot to join the eruv, the outer eruv, somebody from the outer courtyard, isn't going to restrict the inner one. They can carry. They have a valid eruv in here. They can carry in here. No one can carry in the outer eruv. If somebody forgot to join the inner eruv, so they don't have a valid eruv, somebody forgot to join it, they do have a valid eruv in the outer courtyard, so then we're going to have the restriction that nobody can carry. Because, again, no valid eruv in the inner, valid eruv in the outer, and the inner courtyard restricts the outer courtyard. Now, if they did things properly, because really, what should these people do? They should all make one eruv together. That's what they should do. And then, if they all the houses, both in the inner and the outer eruv, deposit a little bit of food in one basket to make a joint eruv for both courtyards, then everybody can carry throughout, whether they position that eruv in the outer court, in one of the houses of the outer courtyard, or in one of the houses of the inner courtyard. Everybody can carry throughout. That's what they should do. Then they can carry in the inner, they can carry in the outer, and they can carry between the courtyards. However, if they make a joint eruv and one of the houses forgot to join into the joint eruv, whether that house was on the inside and the inner courtyard or in the outer courtyard, nobody can carry. Now that they made a joint eruv, if one of the houses forgot to join it, then no one can carry until the owner of that residence that forgot to join the joint eruv renounces his rights in the eruv. So then he can't carry. He can't carry anyway because no one can carry. But once he renounces his rights, everybody else that did join the joint eruv will be able to carry. And we're going to see that there's a little bit of a nuance on that when we get into the Gemara that discusses this Mishnah. And finally, if each of these courtyards only has one house in it, so imagine there's only one house in the inner courtyard and one house in the outer courtyard, then we have a situation where there's only one house per courtyard and no eruv is required, even though you could look at the larger outer courtyard. It's like it has two houses in a sense, and because there's one house in that inner courtyard. But the fact is, even if a courtyard is located inside another courtyard, as long as there's only one house in that courtyard and one house in the outer courtyard, no eruv is required, and they can carry throughout their own courtyards. Can they carry between the courtyards? Unclear. Okay, now we get into the Gemara. And the Gemara tells us, let me just make an adjustment here. So the first commentary on this Mishnah, the rabbis of the Gemara start by noting that when Rav Dimi came from Israel. So if you hear that a rabbi came from Israel, what that means in the parlance of the Gemara, of the Talmud, is that there was a rabbi coming from the Holy Land to Babylonia. So he's bringing a teaching that he learned in the Holy Land, which became a tougher and tougher place to continue good Jewish learning under the Roman oppression. But still, there's a longer continuous stream, right, going back from the rabbis of the Holy Land, where like the sages, date back to the Second Temple period. So one of the rabbis is bringing a teaching from the Holy Land to the Jewish community in Babylonia. Okay. So Rav Dimi comes from Israel, and he says in the name of Rabbi Yanai, so he heard this in Israel, right, from Rabbi Yanai, or at least somebody taught it to him as Rabbi Yanai's teaching. And according to Rav Dimi, who came from Israel, Rabbi Yanai said, if there's no eruv in the inner courtyard, and there is an eruv in the outer courtyard, both are prohibited, and that this is according to Rabbi Akiva. Now, what we learned was that Rabbi Akiva said is that even if there's an eruv in the inner courtyard and there's an eruv for the outer courtyard, separate eruvs, that the inner one is going to restrict carrying in the outer courtyard because the inner people are only permitted to carry in the inner courtyard, but they walk through the outer courtyard, and Rabbi Akiva is concerned that somebody, because they can carry here and they can carry here, that somebody will carry something from the inner courtyard out to the outer courtyard, since they're accustomed to walking through there, since they walk through there all the time to get outside of the joint courtyard. And Rabbi Akiva is concerned that somebody will come to violate Shabbos by carrying something from his house in the inner courtyard out to the outer courtyard. And that's why Rabbi Akiva said, no, you can't do it. Even though they have an eruv and they have an eruv, they're separate eruvs. And so they restrict people from carrying out. Oh, I made a mistake. The concern isn't that these people will carry out here, because he's saying that the people out here can't carry, right? Because there's somebody who hasn't joined in their eruv. Rabbi Akiva wants them to make a joint eruv. That's the main thing. So Rabbi Yanai, according to Rav Dimi, Rabbi Yanai say, But even the teaching that with no eruv in there, they restrict the outer who do have an eruv, that this is according to Rabbi Akiva. And the way he puts it is that even the foot of one who is permitted renders the other courtyard prohibited. I'm not sure why I wrote it this way. So according to Rabbi, Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yanai, so even that the fact that they're permitted here is going. So even if they have an eruv in both places, as Rabbi Akiva said, but the way he puts it is that even the foot of one who is permitted in his own place restricts when he's out of his place, right? So even somebody who's permitted to carry in here, when he gets out here, he restricts them from carrying. The rabbis say whether this foot is permitted in its own place or not permitted in its own place, meaning whether they have an eruv here or not, they're not going to restrict the outer courtyard. So according to this version of the Mishnah, or the way that Rabbi Yanai understands it, according to Rav Dimi, whether these guys have an eruv or not, they're going to restrict these people from carrying. So that's different than what we learned in the Mishnah. We learned in the Mishnah that if they don't have an eruv, then they would restrict these people from carrying. But if they do have an eruv, they can't carry between the two courtyards, but they won't restrict here. Only Rabbi Akiva says that they do. Now we're hearing that according to Rabbi Yanai's understanding of Rabbi Akiva, whether or not, or of Rabbi Yanai's understanding of the rabbis, not of Rabbi Akiva, that whether these guys have an eruv or not, whether they're permitted to carry in their own courtyard or not, they're not going to affect the rights of the outer courtyard. So that does not agree, right? The way we learned the Mishnah is that carrying is going to be permitted in the outer courtyard as long as carrying is permitted in the inner courtyard. Now we've just heard that even if carrying is prohibited in the inner courtyard, it won't affect the ability of the people in the outer courtyard to carry as long as they have a valid eruv for themselves. The sages analyze this teaching of Rabbi Yanai the way that Rav Dimi is reporting it, and they say it's incompatible with our Mishnah. It just has to be wrong. And in fact, it was wrong. Rav Dimi made a mistake. And when Eruvin came from Israel, he said in the name of Rabbi Yanai, okay, that's not what Rabbi Yanai said. What Rabbi Yanai said is that there are three views reflected in our Mishnah. The first is the Tana who says the foot of one who is permitted in his own place does not restrict the outer. If they have a valid eruv here, it doesn't restrict them out here. If they have a valid eruv, they can carry out here and they can carry in here. They just can't transfer objects between the two. Rabbi Akiva said that even the foot of one permitted in his own place restricts the outer courtyard. So if they have a valid eruv here and they have a valid eruv here, just the fact that there's an inner courtyard that can walk through the outer courtyard, according to Rabbi Akiva, is going to make the outer eruv no good. Even though they established a valid eruv, they're not going to be allowed to carry because there are people who can walk through there and who are not members of that eruv. And finally, according to Eruvin in the name of Rabbi Yanai, the latter rabbis of the Mishnah said that whether somebody is permitted or prohibited in his own place, it does not restrict the other, and that is not the law, right? So that is not the law. The halacha is if they have a valid eruv, they do not restrict the people out here who have a valid eruv. Then comes, okay, well, let's say that they did things the right way. They all joined in one eruv together, right? So they're being neighborly, they're doing it the right way so that you can carry in both places. All four houses deposited some food in a basket. It's a joint eruv. Everyone can carry throughout this whole area. But then there's a question of what happens if somebody forgot to join the eruv. One of the houses in this whole area forgot to join the eruv. Okay, so they have a joint eruv. Now let's say that that eruv is located in one of the houses of the outer courtyard. Okay, If one of the houses throughout this area forgot to join, it restricts everybody. And until that person renounces his rights, nobody can carry. However, if somebody, if they made a joint eruv and they stored it in the inner courtyard, in one of the houses of the inner courtyard, if one of the people of the inner courtyard forgot to join it, he's going to restrict everybody. Nobody can carry until he renounces his rights. But here's the special case that we're getting at. If they made a joint eruv for everybody and they stored it in the inner courtyard, and one of the houses of the outer courtyard forgot to join the joint eruv that is stored in the inner courtyard, in that situation, the people in the outer courtyard cannot carry on Shabbos, but the people of the inner courtyard, because all of the houses of the inner courtyard joined the joint eruv, and the joint eruv is stored in the inner courtyard, so you can see that, well, they all joined an eruv that covers the inner courtyard. So they should be able to carry in here, even though nobody can carry out here. The outer courtyard is no good. It's restricted by the inner courtyard, but everybody joined here. If the one who forgot to join the eruv, forgot to put some food in it, renounces his rights, then carrying is going to be permitted throughout the whole area. But if it's a joint eruv in the inner courtyard and just one of the people of the outer courtyard forgot to join it, then the inner courtyard's eruv is intact and they can carry in the inner courtyard. Now, Rabba Bar Hanan said to Abaye, why may the inner courtyard carry when the outer courtyard cannot? Isn't it because they can shut this door? Right? They can shut their door to the outer courtyard and say, okay, we're our own entity. We're not part of the outer courtyard. Our inner courtyard is good. And that's why carrying is going to be permitted here. So says Rabba Bar Hanan, if it's because they could close their door and be their own unit, why doesn't that work according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that the inner courtyard restricts the outer courtyard even if both have a valid eruv? Why can't it be that they just shut the door and then the outer one should be its own unit, the inner one can be its own unit? And Abaye answers Rabba Bar Hanan, because the eruv is placed in the inner courtyard, so people are accustomed to going there. They're accustomed to going in there to deposit food in that eruv that is being stored in the inner courtyard. So the Gemara says, well, if so, then the rabbis should also admit that people are accustomed to enter. If people are accustomed to going through, why are they going to allow that the people in the inner courtyard, they have a valid eruv, but the people of the outer courtyard are left out? And the rabbis can answer, because the people of the inner courtyard could say, we joined the joint eruv, right, in order to benefit, not to be a detriment to us, right? If the eruv is being stored in the inner courtyard anyway, then it's like the same thing to the people of the inner courtyard as making their own eruv in their courtyard. And what they've done now is said, okay, you people in the outer courtyard, you can deposit food in the eruv in our eruv, and that's going to make a joint eruv for everybody. And we're doing that so that now carrying is going to be permitted throughout the whole area, and we can carry things from our courtyard into your courtyard and vice versa. So we're joining it to have an advantage. But we didn't join it to have a disadvantage. So if one of you people in the outer courtyard forgot to put a piece of food in the joint eruv on Friday, we don't want to lose the right to carry in our own inner courtyard. I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, make sure you write them in now, and then I'll be addressing comments and questions soon. So this principle, right, that we joined it to our advantage, not to our detriment, is actually a general principle of agency under Talmudic law, right? Under Torah law, as understood in the Talmud. That when somebody appoints their agent to do something on their behalf, why do you appoint an agent to do something for you? Because it's going to be a benefit to you, right? You can't be there to accept money or to pay money, to make a deal, to get out of a deal. So you appoint an agent to be there for you. And as we've seen a bunch of times, in the case of eruv, we might appoint an agent to deposit some food in a basket for us. And there were special rules about that. But this idea of agency is general. It's throughout sort of contract law, right? So you can appoint an agent to do something to your benefit. Now, if the agent goes outside the scope of the agency and sort of commits you to something that you would never commit to yourself, and that is definitely to your detriment, well, then you can argue, okay, I didn't sign the contract and my agent exceeded the agency to which I appointed him, so I'm not going to be bound by this agreement. Right? And then the court will have to decide, well, did he exceed the scope of his agency or not? If he did, and it's to your detriment, okay, then you can get out of it. If he was within what a reasonable person would say was the scope of his agency, then you are going to be bound by whatever your agent did on your behalf. But with respect to the eruv of the inner courtyard within the outer courtyard, I would say that the main point, right, the underlying value here that we have to keep in mind is if our property is situated in such a way that, you know, our activities on our property affect the quiet enjoyment of our neighbors in their own property, so we really have to go out of our way to be neighborly, right? To make sure that we don't impinge on their right of quiet enjoyment in their own property. I mean, this seems like common sense, right? Obviously, in the case of noise, you know, you want to be, you know, you don't want to upset your neighbors. You could say, hey, you know, we have one party once a year. We're not going to go so late at night. You know, that's reasonable. But if you're having parties every day and it's going late at night, then they, of course, have a very reasonable right to tell you, hey, you know, you're making it impossible for us to enjoy our property. That's the kind of common sense situations of being neighborly. But it goes deeper than that, right? It goes deeper than that. When we think about when we enter into a neighborhood association or we create a neighborhood association and when the neighborhood association makes rules for the neighborhood, how is that going to impact other people? And we shouldn't be so quick, right, to create rules that could have unintended consequences. And we should be as quick as possible to join in things that are going to benefit everybody. You know, and where us being negligent on our own property could negatively impact the enjoyment of our neighbors of their property. All right, let's look at some comments and questions, if any. Rochelle says, what happens in multi-story apartment buildings? So we've definitely seen already that apartments in a building which have their own entrances, you know, are counted as separate residences, right? So it's not on behalf of the whole building. It would be that if you were creating an eruv for the courtyard of an apartment building, that everybody in the apartment building would have to join, or they would restrict the use of the courtyard. Then you could ask, what about the common areas of the apartment building? You know, I haven't researched that question, but it seems to me that they're going to be treated like the courtyard because essentially they're shared courtyard spaces, right? They're shared enclosed areas that everyone in the apartment building has a right to. When you're talking about inner and outer courtyard, and actually we didn't discuss this, I don't do every point on every daf. It would just take too long since we try to go deeper on the points that we do cover. But on this page, they do cover the example of a residence inside another one. In other words, where if you have a residence where you have to pass through somebody else's residence, it's almost like, you know, if you occupy an apartment within an apartment. I mean, that could happen. It could certainly happen where, like I remember when I was growing up, my grandmother lived with us and she had an apartment in our house. It had a separate kitchen, separate bathroom, separate living room, separate bedroom. But for her to go out to the street, you know, she kind of went out the door of her kind of inner apartment and then through our house. She didn't have an exit from her apartment straight out into the yard. So in that situation, the question is asked, do they have to make separate contributions to the eruv, or is it enough if the owner of the house makes one contribution? There were two houses like this, and one of the houses in the courtyard had this inner apartment, and there's actually a dispute about that. Does the outer house of the inner house count as a gatehouse or as a separate house? So there's a dispute about that, and if you were in such a situation and making a very localized eruv, you'd want to look up that law. However, these days, these kinds of questions don't come up very often because we have community eruvs, right? We have community eruvs where we enclose whole neighborhoods, and even larger than whole neighborhoods, whole regions of a city with a system of cross beams made out of fishing line, but that still count as cross beams, and side posts, and we enclose everything. So I live in a single family house in a yard with a yard. I wouldn't have to worry about carrying an object from my house to my yard, but as soon as I go out to the sidewalk, I wouldn't be permitted to do that on Shabbos. However, because we have a community eruv, I can have keys in my pocket, or I can carry a prayer book or a prayer shawl on Shabbos and not worry about it. Tom Beck says, do you have to make these eruvin every week? What a good question. And the answer seems to be no, right? No. Like in a community eruv, they need to check it every week just to make sure that the side posts and cross beams are whole, right? That there hasn't been a break in one of those fishing lines. But in terms of the deposit of food, this is why they very often make it with matzah, because the matzah will keep for a long time. It is bread. The best thing to deposit in the eruv basket is bread. It doesn't have to be bread, but the best thing is bread. And it lasts a long time. So, you're creating that eruv with the idea that it will last for a long time. It has to be checked from time to time, make sure mice didn't get in there and eat the matzah or something, but it doesn't have to be recreated each week. And Tom says, does, for example, the LA eruv cover all the buildings that it encloses? Yes. I mean, everybody who's within the eruv, as long as the eruv has been checked and is, standing. Now there's a website for it. You can see it at laeruv.org. And they check it on Fridays. COVID is another question. But normally, and then you could just go to see that website on Fridays, the eruv is checked, the eruv is good. And every now and then they check the eruv and are unable to repair a problem, then there's no eruv that Shabbos, and people need to know that because they would not be able to carry on that Shabbos. That's why that's not the reason, but some people don't hold by an eruv, so they just don't carry on Shabbos. If they need to, when they go from their house to somewhere else, they don't carry anything. If they're going to a synagogue where they don't normally pray, and they don't keep their prayer shawl there, they just wear their prayer shawl to go to the other synagogue, and they don't carry anything that Shabbos. Stephanie, it's easier to do the community eruv if possible, or apartments and condos you separate by a common area, but you combine the building with one eruv if everyone contributes. Yeah, exactly. Sharon says, what about hotel rooms? If there is a synagogue on one floor of the hotel, like many hotels in Israel, can one carry down in the hotel on Shabbat to go to the shul? What a good question. Now, most towns, especially in Israel, will have an eruv for the whole town, so you don't have to worry about it. But like, for instance, Nina and I gave a talk at a Chabad house in the valley, and they have an eruv around that town, but the hotel where we were staying was outside the eruv. So we couldn't carry anything from our hotel to the synagogue when we were giving a talk. So like, I left, my talis, my prayer shawl there on Friday afternoon, so it would be there for me on Saturday morning. Like a room key, not something you could carry. Now, anyway, on Shabbos, if a hotel uses electronic card keys to open a door, you can't use that because it's gonna, create. It's like creating a fire. There's gonna be a little light in the door, and electronic stuff is gonna go. So you can't use that kind of key on Shabbos. So we kind of just arrange with the hotel a way where the door stays open. It doesn't look like it's unlocked, but it's unlocked, so we can just push it open. And if that doesn't work, then the staff of the hotel needs to know that you're a Jew who has this issue, and you can't ask them to open the door for you, but you can tell them, oh, I'm locked out of my room. I'm a Jew. I'm not allowed to open electronic doors on Shabbat, and so I'm locked out of my room. And then they will say, oh, shall I open the door for you? And then you can say, oh, thank you very much. But what you can't say is, please open the door for me, because then you're making them your agent to do something that you are not allowed to do. If they're just doing it out of their own volition and they suggest it, then they can open the door for you. Lynn says, I discovered that when I looked up the Eruvin in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, in the Book of Law, the Shulchan Aruch with the commentary called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, that I could actually understand some of it, and it seemed easy, direct result of accidental Talmudist attendance. In other words, participating on our AT Daily. When you look up, we're studying how these laws are derived and who said what, but then when you actually have a practical question of what can I do, what can I not do, if you're an observant Jew, you should have this 5-volume set. It's 5 volumes, but it's the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And this is like a kind of fairly compact collection of all the halachas that we actually live by, right? All the laws that actually affect our lives. And when we have a question, can we do this? Can we do that? When can we not? You look it up in there. If you've never studied this stuff, sometimes those laws can be confusing. But Lynn is saying that when we're studying it every day here in AT Daily, it gets much easier, right? And generally speaking, it's just going to get easier and easier to understand what the sages are saying and why they're saying it. Even though if you're joining us for the first time and you're finding this, abstract and confusing, normal reaction, but stay with it and it'll get easier. That's what I've got for us tonight. May we all be blessed with a great week. Certainly a good one, a good vok, a Shavua Tov. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers.